sit there and be like, oh God, I'm hating this and I have to stay. You're very welcome. Like everyone has their own preferences and what they like and what they don't like, and identifying that is really healthy. So what I do, so if you've never been to a non-duality talk before, is I normally do an introduction, and that can go on for 10 minutes, half an hour, even an hour, and then I open it up to questions, and you're welcome to ask anything you want, whether it be about non-duality or whether it be about personal development. You can ask anything. And I normally start the talk with 5 minutes in silence. And I'll just tell you a bit about the way that I talk. I don't plan this. I did, on the walk here, ask my boyfriend what I should talk about tonight, and he said hardcore non-duality. So that's more than likely what's going to come out, but I don't actually plan it. So I just spontaneously speak in the moment. And I do something online, which is, I think, how I became popular as a speaker. I do live streams online, and I really love doing that because basically I go online and I just speak and about whatever I feel like in that moment, and some people like it, some people don't, but they can switch on to something else. And that's basically what I do, is I just speak from my heart. I shut my eyes and I just put my attention here in my heart, and I just wait for a subject to come, and then it comes out. And I can't control it. Like I've got the intention of hardcore non-duality, but I can't control it. Whatever comes, comes. So I often don't do conferences where they pay me to do a subject. I got recently paid to do a conference in an ashram, and they wanted me to talk about death, and I ended up talking about LSD. I think a few of them were slightly shocked and disappointed. It just happened. So yeah. So just take 5 minutes. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I first came across non-duality in Buddhism. I didn't know it was non-duality at the time. It wasn't till a few years later when I came across somebody called Eckhart Tolle that I began to hear the term non-duality. But the first time I came across it was with the Buddhists when they said, you've got to be in the moment, that freedom is being in the moment. And the first time I heard that spoken about, I was like 18, 19, I just started university, and I'd never thought about that before. It never dawned on me anything about the moment or being in the moment. But as soon as they said it, like my skin got like the chicken bumps. I think you call it chicken skin. In English we call it goosebumps, but I think Germans call it maybe chicken skin or something, or French. Goosebumps. And I just knew what was being talked about. There was something about that just being mentioned, that something came alive, that something resonated with that. And they had something called the Heart Sutra, which they always used to chant. It had a particular line in it. I had no idea what the Heart Sutra meant at the time. It's like hardcore non-duality, but they chanted it. And they had one sentence in it, something like, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. And it just used to like send shivers down me. There was something that knew that, even though Lisa had no clue. I thought it was something about me, like achieving something. And I used to like I'm into fantasy and sci-fi, and I used to read these Buddhist books about walking through walls and obtaining magical powers and going back in time and all types of crazy things. And I thought that sutra was something about magic, I don't know. But there was some other part of me that knew what was being talked about. And as I got into Buddhism, like I got pulled more and more towards the non-dual aspect of Buddhism. Even though the whole of Buddhism is about non-duality, I just got pulled more to those teachings. And there was something that deeply resonated and found so beautiful about this moment. Like I'd never had anyone at school or in the education system or my parents ever talk about that before. I knew it though from doing art or from playing, and I remembered it from childhood where you just completely lost in the moment, like what you were doing. It wasn't about future, it wasn't about achieving, it wasn't about getting somewhere. You were just playing for no reason, and you were lost in magic or wonder. And then I began to get into more what I would call hardcore non-duality, where people began to ask me who would be in the moment. And I'd be like, well, me. I'm in the moment. I thought in the beginning it was that I had to be in the moment, that I had to be here. But then the questions began to come, who would be in the moment? And how would that person be in the moment? And I was like, well, you just put your attention in the moment. You stop your mind thinking and you put your attention in the moment, and that's being in the moment. But they began to point out to me, and I began to realise that still was thinking and an activity in time. That still wasn't being in the moment. That was still something that belonged to me and belonged in the thought realm. And it seemed so bizarre, these concepts, like who would be in the moment. I would be like, me! And like at first I really thought that was a terrible idea. And I did exercises where they pointed the finger and was like, who's the finger pointing at? And I'd be like, me! Who else? And they kept asking that question, and I kept asking that question, who would be in the moment? And one teacher that I like called Tony Parsons, he used to say, like the time and the me are the same thing. Like me is in the word time. So if you're in the moment, you're already in time, so you're not here. It's already a thought. It's already something that's moved. It's already something that's passed. And that seems so abstract to you because the mind can't comprehend that there's something else. There's something there prior to the mind. So let me go back a bit then. So let me go back to talking about when you were born. So when you were born, in the beginning, and so if you were here yesterday, you'll have heard this before, but I'll start again as there's new people here. So when you were born, you didn't have a me. You didn't have somebody that could put their attention in the moment. You just were in the moment. There wasn't even a you there that was in the moment. Like, who would that you be that would be in the moment? There was just pure being. And your memory wasn't really functioning, so you can't remember that. But there was this pure being that was alive and present. And it couldn't imagine what wasn't here. It couldn't imagine yesterday or tomorrow. It just was here. It couldn't imagine what was coming, problems, difficulties. It experienced pain, the baby, but it couldn't think of anything. It just was. It didn't have a name, the baby. Even though the parents called the baby a name, the baby didn't identify with the name, or you didn't identify with the name. You just were there looking out, alive and present, like radically alive. And you didn't know that you were inside the body. You didn't have a thought that said, I'm limited and I'm inside skin. I am inside skin and I'm behind my eyes. That thinking hadn't developed yet. But there was this presence looking out, this consciousness that didn't know the difference between its hand and the ceiling, or the feeling of the crib and its back. It just was. It didn't know about two-ness. It didn't know about subject and object, about me and you, and happiness and sadness and pain and pleasure and light and dark and tall and short. It didn't know anything about thinking. It couldn't think. It just was alive, present, free, totally free. Even though you can't remember that, you most probably can remember childhood moments of being so unbelievably free and lost in wonder, like totally lost in what you were doing. You had no sense of who you were or who the other was, or problems, or what you were going to do tomorrow, or what was on the calendar for next month. You were just playing and wondering and creating. But as a baby, you were totally free. And my friend told me this story, his 2 kids, and he told me this time that happened when both his kids were about 1.5 to 2 years old, that they began to do something where the baby would, if you've had kids, you might relate to this, the baby would throw the toy over the head. So at first, the baby would just be like, meh, 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 and then throw the toy over the head. No reaction. The toy was just gone. The baby couldn't think, there's a toy behind me and I just chucked it over my head. It was just gone. It just didn't exist anymore. It wasn't even the thought it doesn't exist. It just was not. It was and then it was not. And so it would keep doing this, like throwing the toy, and then it was gone. And then finally, the child, the baby, turned round and looked at the toy. And then this went on for a while. And looking at the toy. And then this is the beginning of identification. So then, finally, it threw the toy over the head and then began to cry. And he theorized that the reason that happened was because suddenly the baby realized that the toy existed and he didn't have it, or she didn't have it. It existed without me. Whereas in the beginning of that exercise, when the toy wasn't there, it wasn't there. So when the toy was gone, there was nothing else that existed. There was only this present moment. There was only what was happening. And when the toy went, it was no different, because this is all there was and it didn't exist anymore. But then the thinking mind began to process that there was a toy that disappeared and that the baby did not have it. So this is beginning of thinking and subject-object, and the beginning of the idea of me in relationship to things. And so, what in non-duality it says happens is that at 2 or 3 years old, something happens called identification with the body. And maybe some people remember this. I vaguely remember it. Before, you don't really know your name, and you don't really know who you are. you're interacting and you're functioning with the world, but you don't have a center. You're just like watching, there's just an experiencing happening, but there's nothing that's registering that or experiencing that. And then there comes a point where you begin to identify with the name and the body, and you begin to form an idea that you are that body and that name. And I was about 5, I was a late beginner. They nearly put me in special needs school. So I was about 5 when I identified, and I remember they kept writing down my name and telling me I was Lisa. And I remember having this feeling, if I didn't do that, if I didn't say my name is Lisa, that I couldn't be part of the human world. I know that sounds like I'm mentally deranged, but it was really a really strong feeling that I had to, in order to be part of my family and part of humans, I had to be a name called Lisa. And this, I suspect, happened to everybody, but you just can't remember it. I was a late developer, so I get the memory of it. So who was I before that? Like, who were you before you became your name? And I remember, like, looking in the mirror, and it was like, I am Lisa. But who was I before that? Who were you before that? We are so convinced and hypnotized in our society that we are name, and that we are body, that we're our gender, our age, our ethnicity, our financial background, our country, like our nationality. We're so hypnotized to believe that that's who we are, we forget our original essence. That cannot be who you are, because you weren't born into that world, that. And who you think yourself to be is always evolving and changing, so that's not something solid. But there is something in your experience that's always there, that's always been there, and that's been there before you were born and will be there after you die. And that's what non-duality points to. And non-duality is called non-duality because it means not two, something that isn't two in this reality. So it's really difficult to talk about because our language is dualistic, so our language is an opposite. So we know things by what they're not. We know somebody to be tall because they're not short, but it's all dependent. Like, so if I go to Holland, I'm short. I'm sure that I'm really not allowed to say this anymore. If I go to England, let's just say I'm tall. But in Holland, I'm definitely short. Or Australia, I'm short as well. Whereas in England, I'm tall. So it's not a fixed thing, it changes. Like if I was stood next to a giant, if giants exists, which maybe they do, or a gnome or something, then my size differs. It's a little like Alice in Wonderland, like the size differing. So we're not a fixed thing. Like our character, our name, who we identify with, isn't a fixed thing and is always changing. But yet we believe as a society that that is who is looking out of these eyes and that is who is experiencing. But is there something in your experience now that is prior to who you think you are, that's always been there? When my mum turned 70, she's now 76, she was like feeling a little bit depressed about being 70, and she was like, oh, I really don't feel like I'm 70. It's a shock when I look in the mirror and I see a 70-year-old woman looking back. She said, actually, most of the time I don't see a 70-year-old woman. It's when you catch yourself by surprise, you know, you're walking across, you're like, who's that old woman? Oh, that's me. And she said, I really don't feel 70. And my friend, like, I'd never really talked to my mum about non-duality. Like, she thinks that I teach positive thinking, and I'm like, yeah, we'll go with that. But my friend went for it. He was like, okay, yeah, you don't feel like you're 70. You feel like the same age as when you were 20, the same age as when you were 15, 30, 40, 50. You don't feel like you're a 70-year-old woman. And she was like, no, I don't. I do feel like the same age as when I was 21. And he was like, is it because your essence is ageless? There is an essence there that's looking out that does not have an age, that doesn't have a body, that isn't definable. My mum really got it. She was like, yeah, there is. And then I don't know what she made of it after that, but it was really sweet to see. And this is the same with all of us. All of us have an essence. And this essence we think of, maybe in the West, as individual. or we think it belongs to us. And sometimes we have an idea that it maybe is like it goes on from this life to another life, and it belongs to you in some way. But actually non-duality suggests, and from my experience, your essence isn't divided. And this is really quite magical. Now, even though I promised my boyfriend hardcore non-duality, I'm not going to use hardcore words. I'm going to use the word consciousness. So in non-duality, you can use different levels of words, and consciousness is it's an easier word to use because it has more meaning. We can relate to it a bit better. So I don't mean consciousness in the terms of something like Freud or Carl Jung, where it means conscious and unconscious. I don't mean that consciousness when I'm speaking. I'm talking about a bigger consciousness. What I talk about when I normally talk about your self-consciousness, I talk about it as personal awareness. When I say the word consciousness, I mean that consciousness that when you go to the doctors and you have a tooth out, or when I have my teeth out, they knocked me out. Like they give you an injection and the consciousness disappears, or seems to disappear. Like you go unconsciousness and then you wake up again and time has passed. I mean that consciousness. So that looking which is happening now out of your eyes. So in non-duality, they say there's only one consciousness. Isn't that cool? So everybody's got a consciousness. So it's not something to do with you as a person. That's not about your name or your personality or your unconsciousness or your personal awareness. It's that everybody's got that same consciousness, that same recognition of what's happening now. That instantaneous recognition of what's happening. And there's one consciousness. And to say in India or in Hinduism or in Advaita or Buddhism, they would call that, maybe, different teachers differ and different groups and organizations differ, God. So that's God looking out. So everybody is God looking out. And God is manifesting as multiple with unique personality structures that are being experienced. So let me talk a little bit more about this consciousness. So isn't that really amazing? So the first time I had that sense that it wasn't me looking out of my eyes as Lisa was, it was sort of gradual and I had many steps, but one time I had it really clearly. I was, actually I can't remember which was the first time, but one of the times, I don't like to lie, so I've got terrible memory. So one of the times I had this sense, I was listening to somebody speak and they said, right now, God is looking out of your eyes. And I just had this profound sense of this still silence that was looking out and all things and touching everything and was everything. And it was totally still and totally silent, and it had always been there supporting everything. It was there holding the entire life of Lisa, the entire manifestation. And it was just really like shocking, like it's always been there. So let's talk a little bit more about this consciousness. So again, I'm not talking about Freud or Jung's description of consciousness and unconsciousness. I'm talking about that consciousness which seems to disappear when you go to sleep. It's not that it actually disappears when you go to sleep, it's just in sleep there's nothing to be conscious of, so there's just nothing. But it seems to disappear in sleep. I'm talking about that consciousness. And that consciousness is your birthright. You don't have to do anything to have that. It's free. Everything else in this life you normally have to pay for, but that consciousness is free. You don't have to be like, wake up in the morning and be like, excuse me, can I have some consciousness? It's just there. You wake up and you're instantly conscious, and it's there in every experience, in everything you do, there is consciousness. So right now, it's happening timelessly. That you are conscious of the sound of my voice. You're conscious of this seat, of this table, of the wall. And it happens instantaneously. There is no time in it. It's always there. It's always here. And what happens is that consciousness is conscious of somebody that thinks and somebody that feels and somebody that's telling a story of themselves. And that story of you and the consciousness intermingle, and then you think you as a person are conscious. But that consciousness is prior to the person and instantaneous, and it's your birthright. It's what's always been there. And it knows right now. It knows these sounds. It knows the feeling. And you don't have to, it's not like I have more consciousness than you, or your neighbour has more consciousness than you. It's there. It's the birthright. It belongs to everyone. You don't have to be a good person to be conscious. You don't have to do certain things to get more consciousness. It's always there. Always. And there's nothing that can take you away from you. You might think, oh, somebody could kill me and take it away from me, but you can't, because consciousness is prior to the body. So even if you die, it will be the form that's taken away, and then a new form will appear. Or there will be rest for a period, whatever. You can't have it taken. So this is really hard and really easy. It's incredibly easy because it's right here. It's incredibly hard because your mind is always fixating on things. The way we think is in opposites, in this and that. So your mind is focusing on something that you can intellectually think about and grasp. So when I begin to talk about something that isn't divided and isn't a thing, your mind is like zzz, zzz, zzz. It's like has a bit of a like short fuse, and it can't really get it. It can produce anger. It can just produce like confusion. Some people just don't hear this part of the talk, and then they come up and tell me about some therapy part they like of it, and I'm like, okay. But it's like some people just have a blank out at this point because you cannot grasp it in words, but yet it's here. Yet there is consciousness of this room. Like you think that, like I used to think that I knew this wall because I thought about it. Like, so I thought that I knew things because I thought about them. Like I'd never considered that I could know things without thinking about them. But actually, your thinking can drop away and there is consciousness of the wall, but it's not got a name. It just is. It's the same with like you're focusing maybe on my face or my body, and then you know that in the background. You're not naming it, but it's still appearing. The same with the distance between us. So what does it mean if you're consciousness? It means that, this is the best part, for all the narcissists in the room though, it's never good to say this to a narcissist. Hopefully there's none here. But it means that everything's appearing in you, not to you. Because what's outside of your consciousness now? Like what is outside of it? Your mind could think of all these things. It's like, well, there is a festival out there, there's my mum, my dad, my kids, my wife, my husband, my money, my house. But that's all thoughts. There is nothing outside of your consciousness. Everything is in your consciousness. The whole world is in your consciousness. And this is where it becomes the teaching of not-to-ness. I know your mind will have questions about this and be like, yeah, but there is a world out there, I know there is. But even science begins to question this. I can't tell, I'm not a scientist, I can't give you in-depth explanations about science, but even quantum physics, the experiment with the cat, which I'm not going to explain to you, begins to point to this, that actually things like matter doesn't appear until it's looked at. Like, so that's quite scary, maybe, if you've not thought about that before, because it actually means that right now we're suspended in the middle of nowhere. We're not in Sweden, in Europe, on a planet, in a solar system, circling an Earth, which I've just got to say is a really bizarre idea, but everyone's like quite happy with that. They're like, yeah. But when I begin to say, okay, but you're suspended in the middle of nowhere, everyone's like, I mean, it's quite bizarre that we're spinning a big ball of gas. But that's what it means, and that's scary, because it questions everything about the way that you see the world on the human level. Because normally the way we see the world is through you and your relationship with the world and your meaning with the world and what your meaning is, what your purpose is in time. So normally your day-to-day thinking is about where you are, where you're going to, where you've been, and what life is going to give you, and what you can get from life, or what life has done to you, dependent on your particular setup. So it means that that begins to be really questioned, because you're not anywhere. That's not who you are. There's a character, that's like a character that appears and functions, but that isn't who you are. So, so I just do a little bit more talking before I open up to questions. So, if everything is inside of you now, like if everything isn't happening to you now, and if everybody's is the same consciousness, like so if there's consciousness, so let me explain it in this way. So people get confused between how consciousness can simultaneously be looking out of all the bodies at one time, or how God, if you want to call it God, could be looking out of all the bodies at one time. And the reason humans get confused about that is because they project there is a brain onto consciousness. They project that consciousness should have a memory and remember all the different lives, so that you on the human level should see everybody else's life. But think of it like this. If we had a paper bag now, and I poked like 100 holes in that paper bag, and then I put a light inside that bag, there would be 100, like, and we turned all the lights out, there would be 100 streams of light coming out of that bag. And it's still one light, but it appears as many. And that's what's happening through everybody's eyes now and everybody's senses, is that consciousness is looking out, but it doesn't have a memory. It just is being conscious, and it can do it from multiple angles. Like time also is something that exists in the human world. It's not a fact. It's not like time comes before the creation of this world. Time is something that humans created and put onto the world, and time doesn't really quite work, because if you go in an aeroplane and circle the world really fast, I think, for a long time, then your time on your clock begins to go out of time on the ground. Like it's not a fixed thing. So, but this is something for you to contemplate for yourself, and not something for me to just keep preaching at you, and for something for you to see yourself. And this is the beautiful thing about non-duality, is it is something that you see yourself, not as you on the human level. It's a waking up and remembering there is something prior to the human. And that consciousness has no mission, it has no goal. It's not trying to make you a better person or free you or give you anything on the human level. It is simply experiencing this expression of life freely. And it supports everything. It's totally unconditioned love. It loves the sinner and the saint, the good and the bad. And that it has to. If it's going to be unconditioned love, it has to love it all. And that's hard for people that like are drawn to goodness, or on the human level, like have a sense of morality, because this isn't a God that discriminates. But that's absolute forgiveness. And if you look at Christianity, so I always think that non-duality is in the basis of all religions and all stories, and even in psychology I think non-duality is there. If you look at all religions, they do talk about this forgiveness. Like it is a huge thing. Like I love it. Like I think it's in Catholicism. I don't really know it very well, Catholicism, but that you do something wrong and then you go and you admit it and you apologize for it and then it's forgiven. That this is really beautiful. That is very cathartic, and it's really beautiful for society to have that. But if you look at it in terms of non-duality, like our Creator, which is who you are, forgives every part of you, loves every part of you. So anything that you think is wrong about you, your essence is supporting and holding and loving, and has no judgment on at all. But I think what I'll do now is I'll just open it up to questions, because I can't gauge, if I'm going too much or if I'm not going enough. So if you have any questions, if there's anything you'd like to ask, no matter what it is, I'm so happy to speak about it. I'm also happy to talk about personal problems, but I do see it as two different things. Like, I'm not opposed to working on the character on the personal level, and I do that if you follow me or if you listen to what I say, but at the moment I'm just speaking about the absolute. I'm not speaking about the person. Like, I've just been speaking about the absolute level. Yes, I think there's a microphone for you. It might not reach that far back. Concept of time, yeah. So right now, most people in this room, I'm not saying you are, but most people in this room have this idea that they came from a different place, walked here and sat down in this room, and that different place still exists. And that's what's happening to most people all the time, is they're having a story running in their imagination of what's happened, of where they're going. And that gives you a sense, a linear sense of where you are, like you think you know where you are. And you think that you're moving through a timeline. Whereas actually that's never your experience. Your experience is this moment, which is timeless. And in that, images appear of time. So your experience is always that you're still, that you're right here, and that things come and go in you. And time is a really weird thing. Like sometimes if I travel a lot, so if I travel a lot in a month, it feels like the month is very, very long. And if I don't travel a lot and if I'm at home, it feels like the month passes really quickly. And the reason that I've come up and why I think that happens is because when I travel, I have lots of things to remember. So it gives the appearance of more time. Whereas when I don't have anything to remember in particular, it's like it passes really quickly. So it's all about memory, this perception of time. It's not a fact, it's not something that's true. It's something that is appearing in your imagination, and you're gauging where you are by this appearance of time. But where you are is now. Even the idea is simply an idea that there is a place that you've come from to this. Actually, you are right here looking out. This presence, this consciousness is right here, and then there's an image of you, and most people even formulate a picture of you moving through the world, and then you coming here and sitting down. It's all pictures of you. You're not even inside your eyes, like looking from your eyes. You're actually imagining a body doing that. And actually, in every moment, you're simply here and conscious, and everything is appearing inside your consciousness. There's nothing that appears outside consciousness, and you never ever will have proof that there is an outside of your consciousness. And it's funny because people take that as the reality, that things are happening outside of my consciousness and that there's a world that exists that's outside this room. They take that as the reality, but actually your experience is there is only this. This is all there is. And that's your actual experience. Everything else is imagined. So humans are hypnotized by this idea of time. It's something we taught each other. If you take an animal, or if before humans speak or thought, so before we developed like this complicated language or thinking system, we didn't have these images and this idea of time. And we were just here. Like if you take my dog is super cool. She's always travelled her whole life. She's originally from Thailand, and I travel all over Europe with her. And I know that she can't really formulate much of time. She can't really think that much. She has some sense, like it's dinner time, but I think that might just be that she's hungry and it's like a routine. And she sort of remembers where her bone is, but maybe that's smell. And they say that they do a lot through smell, like memory comes a lot through smell. But most of the time, she doesn't know time, and she doesn't know how long things are or where she is. And it's really cool because I take her to a hotel, I put my clothes down, and normally I put my stuff down, normally I go down for dinner and I leave her in the room. And she's so good at just accepting that. Like, she doesn't know where she is. She's got no perception that she's come from the south of France and now she's in Germany and she's in a hotel room. She's only ever there in that moment. She can't imagine that she's a dog and that she came from the past or that she's going to the future or even that I will come back. She just is there in that room with that sensory perception. And she's relaxed because my smell's there and I'm the leader and that relaxes her. She knows I come back for her, so she just waits. But she doesn't have any sense of it. She doesn't even know who she is. She can't imagine who she is. Like a dog, when you show a dog's image in a mirror, like it can't recognize itself. Like, who would she imagine herself to be? Like, I really doubt that she imagines herself as a dog with like black pointy ears and a curly tail and like has an owner called Lisa. Like, she can't think of herself. She can't see herself. She can't imagine that she moves around in time. So she's only ever here experiencing this, and the body responds to this. So they also say that we came from chimpanzees, or we evolved from chimpanzees, so we used to live up in the trees, and that when we came down to the forest ground, that we had to use our mind a lot more, which created time. So when we were chimpanzees, or when we lived up in the trees, we didn't have to have a very strong imagination of time. We didn't really have to have much language because survival was a lot easier in the trees. Like, we didn't have to think about problems and fix problems, but when we came down to the ground, it was a lot more dangerous. And we had to evoke time, we had to have planned things, and we had to work out how to capture or defend ourselves against animals. And eventually it progressed onto like herding animals and keeping animals, and we became really good at survival. But in the beginning, we had to evolve from just being here, so not really having much sense of time, not really having much sense of me or the other or anything, and then we evolved to have this perception of time. But it's only our perception, it's not reality. We take it as a society as reality, that time is real and the way we think is real, where it's absolutely not real. It's only the way we speak, it's only the way we communicate in order to survive better. But we see our reality like that, we see ourselves like that. Whereas there's something here that's beyond that, beyond what we think, beyond what we know, beyond what we believe ourselves to be. And it's way more mysterious and magical than you can ever comprehend. Is there anyone at the back that could open the windows? Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Question, there would be a little bit of provocation in it, because I feel like talking about the absolute is kind of interesting. Like, who is talking about the absolute? And yeah, what intention do you have about talking about the absolute? I mean,
what intention on the human level do I have?
Yes, in a way, it's like, I don't know. I feel like there may be some mind strategy behind, I suspect. So I would actually, I see myself like questioning the authenticity of the quest, of the sharing too.
Yeah, if I'm authentic. So there's two levels, there's two realms, that even though it's only one. So the human, I get excited talking about this stuff. So you've got the absolute level that's here. So there is nothing looking out now from everybody's perspective, but some people are identified with form. And then it comes through a character. So there is this looking out that's life, and it's not separate from life. So this looking out is everything that's here. Like it's right here, it's right now. And that's who you are all the time. But it comes through a character. So there is this character called Lisa. And Lisa has desires and wants and needs, and she has conditions and she has ideas, and she has ways of expressing this. Like there's a pattern in which she expresses this. Although the character tends to change a lot in the way she expresses this, and it gets updated and changes. And that's on the conditioned realm, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have no issue with the personality, but it's two different realms. So you could, on the absolute level, you could say right now it is no thing or consciousness or the absolute speaking. But then, if I switch to the personal level, then it's Lisa speaking. And Lisa does have motivations and she has desires. First of all, in this moment, what is my desire to express? Okay. So in this moment, in my body, I have like a really warm feeling here. And this is something that often comes, like I try to be really genuine in the moment and not like repeat things. But often what I have is this feeling that I want to express love through words. So it comes from here and it like bubbles up and it comes out as words. Like, so it starts from here. But it also can be from a different place. Like sometimes when I'm expressing to someone, like if I do a one-to-one session or if I'm expressing to someone that are annoying me, it can come from anger and there can be a motivation from anger. But at this moment it comes from that place on the human level. And then if I move back to the absolute level, then who's speaking and who's expressing? Like, and who's, like it's just coming out. It's just appearing, it's just manifesting. And so there's two different, like seems to be opposites, but it's so beautiful. And like, there's nothing wrong speaking on either. There's nothing wrong with healing the character. I don't see the character as ever arriving. So I see that like that the character will infinitely expand, the personality structure will infinitely expand, humanity has the potential to infinitely expand, knowledge has that potential as well. So I don't see the character as ever arriving. So I don't see myself on the Lisa level as enlightened or arrived or as awakened. Like other people sometimes say that to me and I'm like, it feels a little odd for people to say that about the character because the character doesn't feel like that. The character just feels like it feels like in the moment, whether it be happy, sad, angry, peaceful or not, but it certainly doesn't have a story running like my character is enlightened and I know more than you or anything like that. It just is what it is in the moment. But then on the absolute level, there is nothing speaking here. And that's here, that's now happening. Like I'm looking at you and there is this character that's like got this feeling of it coming out here and coming from the heart and coming and expressing to you. And then there's this other part that is looking at you and not separate from you and sees you in innocence. And they're married, but at the same time, it's not like they're married in the sense that it belongs to Lisa. It belongs to the absolute. Yes, but one second, because I do have this rule that I don't know if this is PC or not. I'm not very good at being PC, but I try to go at least a little bit man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. So it just will come, but I would just go to a woman first. Well, okay, but I just go to someone that's a woman first, because otherwise it will be dominated by men. I'm sorry. But nice, I'm sorry if you don't identify as a man or if you're not a man.
I have a very good question.
That's okay, but we just do this because otherwise it will be men that get. Sorry, it's just the way it goes. So there we go.
Do you feel that? Is it on?
It's not gonna.
Yeah. Do you feel that this absolute have a longing to come through?
No.
No.
No, I don't feel like the absolute contains anything. The absolute has no quality.
Okay.
Absolutely no quality.
No qualities. No.
No, it's absolutely empty of anything. It just is watching. It's pure. It's free. Wanting and desire all is in the human realm.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong. So it's always the human that longs to come home.
But what is it we as persons then should learn to come into this, to start be looking,
Yeah,
be a channel for this absolute?
yeah.
What is it that we should?
I see it as a really impersonal thing that happens, like waking up is really impersonal. And I see it as a collective thing. Like, as humans, we like to think of ourselves as individuals, but I actually see us as a species that's evolving. And I think that waking up is something that's happening in our species, and I think it's actually happening at a rapider pace, like more rapid pace, over the last like 40, 50 years in the West. And I like have all these theories, like one part of me is really romantic, and then one part of me is really practical on the human level. Like the reason that I think it's happening in the West like this is because in the West we've satisfied our survival. Like we've mastered survival. Like, so Ramesh Balsekar, he used to say that, you know, you can't be thinking about this. Like I'm laughing, don't find it funny, but you can't be thinking about this if you're on the bread line. Like if you're on the bread line and you're starving, you've got kids to think, you can't be thinking about what's the nature of reality. Like, so what we've done in the West, particularly in Europe, I predominantly know Europe, is that we've kind of got to quite a high level, and peaceful level, believe it or not, like of existence. Like we've got all these social securities. Even though some people might not feel rich, we are relatively rich in comparison. I think we're maybe the top 5%. And most of us, even though we feel insecure in a way, that's more the mind than the practicality of it. We're quite secure, and often we've got governments that will support us if we go bad. Not all of the countries in Europe, but if something bad happens to us, there's some form of support system. And I think in that, as a species, then this question begins to be asked. Then we begin to ask what's the meaning of life. Before that, we were totally focused on surviving. And I think it's a really beautiful evolution of humanity, because no other human has identified, no other animal is identified, and so identified with being form and forgotten that who it was this awakeness. And then I think what happens is we lose ourselves, and then we're beginning to go back to ourselves, and this will have a profound effect on our societies. And this will happen the more that societies become peaceful and stable, I think. And I think it's a very practical thing of evolution. I know that other teachers give really romantic stories of like consciousness wanting to wake up and know itself. I think it's just a natural expression that happens when an animal begins to think and then identifies with that thinking.
So it is just something that happens.
Yeah. And I think it's a collective thing. Why do I talk about it? On the absolute level, I couldn't be anything else. I just ended up here. That was my programming. That was a particular story of this body. On the human level, it's like an expression of love. I'm so passionate about this subject. I see it as absolute freedom. I see it as freedom beyond therapy, beyond conditions. Like it's absolute freedom, and I believe it's what will actually give us peace in our societies as well. I don't actually do it for peace in society though. I do it because I love the subject, and I'm so excited to share it with people.
So the choice is you as a person.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
You can make up for all the other women.
Yeah.
Don't ask. Okay, yeah. Any of you would like finish now?
It's just
Yeah,
you talk as that is a personal thing.
yeah,
The choice.
yeah. On the human level, yeah.
On you.
That's what it feels like. So the consciousness can't act. Consciousness needs to create a body and needs to create a human with desire in order to act. Really, every action, every desire is God, or consciousness is desire. But it's just that consciousness is spontaneously creating without any reason. And then it creates reason in the human life. So really, every desire you have, every impulse you have, is life, or consciousness is God's desire through the human form. But yeah, I keep switching levels, but it's where you have to speak. But yes, okay, to this gentleman here.
Oh, maybe you answered my question. I will take it short.
Yeah.
You're talking about the absolute, and if there is I wonder if there is any purpose in the absolute.
No. The
Yes,
absolute
and
has no purpose.
this question you answered for me through her question.
Yeah.
And then the question is, so we human beings create the purpose, that it's so important that to have a purpose, and actually we don't need a purpose.
No, on the human level, it's important you have a purpose.
but the absolute have no purpose.
Yeah, the essence have no purpose.
So
The
we
problem is when
creating
you're
the
just-
purpose.
When you on the human level, but when you're just identified with the human and the human's purpose, then this is when you get into suffering, because you're so identified with your purpose and your meaning in this life, it becomes so important. So it's like balancing the two. But the human, if the human tries to give itself therapy through non-duality, it'll be a disaster. The human needs purpose. Like the human that doesn't have purpose will more than likely be depressed. But it's also not so important, your purpose. Like, really your purpose is just to be, like it's just to be whatever you're doing. Like, so it's not so important. But when you're just identified with the human form, like the mind begins to mix up survival, so the purpose of our society, with its identity, and then it gets so invested in it. And then if it doesn't go the way it wants, or if it doesn't happen, then it creates so much suffering. And you begin to seek for freedom in your purpose, whereas your freedom is being here. Your freedom is this experience now. Whereas when you're just identified with the person, then you mix up that freedom and you think, my freedom is in saving humanity or saving other people or spreading this message. Whereas your freedom, what you're truly looking for, is coming home, which is right here, now, this. It's the absolute.
If I understand you right, so you mean to be conscious about both? Give us a good balance?
It's not that you're conscious about both. So I'll show you through physical description how I think it happens. So before, what happens, so this is the character, this hand is the character, is the person, is your personality, and this is the absolute. And before, when you're identified, you think the person is conscious. So they're totally mixed together. So you think that you as a person are conscious and looking out of your eyes. And you think that person has a name, a body, an identity. And then what happens in awakening is they begin to separate. Like, so it begins to become, the consciousness is less identified with the personality structure. And it begins to separate. And then it turns round. And then predominantly, like in every moment, what's happening is what's looking out is the essence, is no thing appearing as everything, or consciousness, whatever you call it. So the essence is looking out, and then in that comes and goes a character. So what most people think, though, is the character wakes up, and the character gets consciousness. Whereas it's the opposite way around, is consciousness takes over, and then the character comes and goes in that consciousness, in that stillness. So actually the person, it's not about holding them together, it's an energetic shift that will naturally happen as this subject is explored. And it's not really to do with you. Like Ramesh Balsekar used to say, your head is in the tiger's mouth. Like, as soon as you get into this subject, you're like, you're done for. But it's not really your doing. Nothing's really your doing. We think that everything's our doing. But it's a very narcissistic way of looking at things. Like, we don't really know how we speak. We don't really know how we see or how we breathe or how we beat the heart or how we even move a hand. We've got a storyteller that's like, I move my hand. I'm going to move my hand. I'm going to speak, but I don't know how this happens. Like, I squeeze my throat and make sounds. But really, it's just happening. It's coming out. Looking and hearing and speaking is happening. When I was a kid, I think I was a little bit weird as a kid. But they named me as dyslexic, so I got away with it, with maybe like dyspraxia as well. But I remember we used to walk down the alleyway home, like a small alleyway that echoed. And I'd be walking along and I'd be like, Mum, look, the legs are walking. And she'd be like, yes, Lisa. And I'd be like, but look, they walk. And I just used to be so amazed that I didn't have to do anything and the legs walked. Like that's amazing. And it's happening to us all the time. All the time you're sitting there and you think that you're holding your back up or that you're sitting there and you're doing it, but actually it's happening. And what a relief that is. Like, what a relief, it's happening all the time. But we have this storyteller that's always like, I'm doing it, me, it's mine. They say, scientists, like, I've never done this experiment and I'm not a scientist, but from things that I've read, they say that, so we make a choice. So a choice is made in the body or in the unconscious, and then 6 seconds later, we tell the story of making the choice. So we're like choosing between Coca-Cola or like a smoothie, or like healthy smoothie, and we think that it's us that's making the choice. But our body, so 6 seconds before we go, okay, I'm going for the cola, our body has already made the choice. And then we tell a story about it being our choice and it belongs to us, which is really quite amazing and funny and sweet and endearing. It's what's happening to animals. I remember when I said to my dad that I didn't think the dogs thought, or if they thought, it was very simplistic, but because they don't have language, they don't think. He was like, don't be ridiculous. How would they do anything if they didn't think? But there's so much we do where we don't think that we tell ourselves we do it because we think. Like when I'm driving, I'm certainly not thinking. As soon I drive between England and Europe, I live in France, so I'm always like changing between. I have an English car, so I drive on the. What side do I drive on in an English car? I get so confused by it all. Yeah, left. So and then I drive in France, and I go back to England. If I thought about it, I would crash. Like my rule is, I don't think about it, and if I begin to panic, I just pull over. So I just go for it. It's so confusing going between the two. Like a roundabout. I go back to England, and straight away there's a roundabout, and I'm like. And I just have to trust the body will do it, and it does. Like I've done this for years, like 8 years or something. And as soon as I begin to think about it, like which way do I go at the roundabout, I get into panic, and then I'm like, ugh. Like it happens. The same with like riding the bike, and this is why we sometimes like extreme things, like extreme sports, because we stop thinking. Like you can't think when you're skiing. Like it happened to me once. I was skiing. I'm not a good skier, but I decided to think when I was like on a black slope, which means a very hard one. And then for 3 hours, I just got stuck laying down. Like I couldn't do anything. I just had to lay there. Like you can't think doing these things. And normally you have a crash and you make a mistake when you begin to think. Like it happens. And who's doing that? You could say the body is like on automatic, which fair enough that maybe it is. But who still is doing that automatic? Like, so you're like, okay, the body's on automatic, but still, who does that? Like, who's doing the automatic? We're always saying it's me, but who? In that moment of being on automatic, we're still convinced it belongs to us. So another way you can look at it is like your telephone, like Siri. So Siri doesn't have free will, we don't think. I mean, we're going to have this problem with AIs in the future, and I'm sure that AIs are going to start wanting their freedom. Like, and they're going to start wanting pensions and like social security and to be treated like a real person and not a slave. But we presume that Siri doesn't have any free will. But yet Siri appears like he has, mine's a he, has a free will. Like, so he speaks to me and I say to him, Siri, can you pull up this and do this for me? And he does it. And he asks me questions. And we assume that he doesn't have free will, but he's always evolving, just like we are. So he evolves to the way that I interact with him, and he's learning about me and evolving, just like our machines are. We say it's us that's evolving, it's us that's learning, whereas actually it's our machinery that's learning and updating and being reprogrammed, and it's so much more complicated than we can possibly think about. It's so complicated the way this instrument is working, but we're so convinced it belongs to us, and that idea that it belongs to you and that you are somebody, a separate entity that belongs inside the body, I would suggest is all your suffering in this life. It's not your screwed up childhood or your traumas, although I do suggest healing them, but I don't think they'll ever end, because you'll heal a trauma and then something else will happen. Like, you like got one, you're like, you know, when you're at the park and you're hitting down those little things that come up, you're like, yes, got a trauma, and then another one pops up. It won't end. You'll never get to this place where you get perfect conditioning, or you get out of being conditioned. It's something that's always evolving and always happening. But we think often that it's about like becoming a perfect conditioned being and getting over our childhood and getting over our problems. But your freedom actually is remembering who you are, and then your conditioning is either painful or pleasurable. And I always recommend you to condition yourself in positive ways. Like, I'm not against reconditioning yourself. Yes, another question. We'll go for a lady.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey.
Hey, I'm just curious about what you think the idea is about even having this human experience and this brain that is so prone in thinking in duality.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why that's appeared. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
It's
It kind of seems a bit silly, no?
yeah, it is a
Kind of
bit silly.
Like, yeah.
And it's also scary and crazy and all different things, but yeah. But I don't know why it's done that, but it's done it. And as you begin to rest more and more in who you are, you'll feel completely comfortable with that and it will feel like it makes sense. Even though it doesn't really make sense, but there will be a part of you that knows that it's creating. Like in a way, like it's the same when you're lost in creating absolute like art, if any of your artists, like often we're creating art in order to sell it and to make money, but sometimes we just create it for no reason at all. Like absolutely, and it's just in the creativity. So if there was going to be any answer, I would presume it's about the creativity. But I don't know. But it becomes the problem with meaning and purpose is that when you challenge that on the human level, you want a purpose on the absolute level to make it better, because our identity is totally interwoven with purpose.
Really abundant, and can you say something about how can we be more stop worrying about this money thing?
Yeah.
And I really want to create art, and I don't worry about money, and I don't create anything good if I do think about money.
Yeah. So I just say something about words first. Like when I used to live in Australia, something that I found really beautiful was that the Aboriginal people of the particular area that I lived.
I also lived in Australia.
You did, yeah, in Western Australia, where were?
No, in South Australia.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And Central and
I live there.
It's super beautiful.
Me too.
So one. So one thing that I learned there, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, is that the Aboriginal people tended to learn their environment through song. And it wasn't until I reflected on that, because I thought that's so beautiful, I thought, why don't I come from a society that knows their environment through song? Like, can you imagine knowing like maps and distance through song? Like, that's so beautiful. And then I thought, but we just do it differently. We know our environment through stories, and stories are magical and wonderful. It's just that I always presumed that stories were true, and I didn't see them as that they're fiction. They're something that's just appointed to help guide us somewhere. They're not true. So that was something that really struck me when you talked about art and poetry, is that even in this talk, in a way you could say it's art, because it is just pointing at something else. It's never really saying anything. We can never really say anything. We think we can, but we can't. And our culture, like we sometimes are down on like European culture, our culture teaches and educates through storytelling, and we forget that we're storytellers. And we make it so serious and so academic, but really it's all about stories. And play is about creating stories. So it's really beautiful the way that we communicate. But it's never fact. We always take what we say to be fact and real. Like even the story of us, and then we believe the story of us is real, but it's always changing and it's not fact. So back to money and creating art. And yes, I do think that eventually we'll be in a society that's just based on trust. It won't even be an activity of trust. It will just be the way it is. So money, it's not so simple for me to do it too quickly. So money is a human thing, and it will be an imbalance in the chakra area. So you will have an association with money that you don't deserve it, or that money is evil or money is bad. Whereas money is really an exchange that's happening. So you give me something and then I give you something in return, but it's just like an IOU. So rather than me having to give you like a bag of rice, I can give you an IOU and we can swap money for things. It's not a bad, evil thing. It's become bad and evil because it's been associated with power and power abuse. So it's normally when we have money issues, it's because we hate money, because we've been hurt by money, and it's just making friends with money again. But it's quite a deep conditioning because we associate it with authority and things being taken away from you and power control over you. And it's just seeing that you are allowed to receive energy for what you do. You are worthy of receiving energy for what you do. And money is simply energy. And I do think that things come to you through the rules of law of attraction. It's totally impersonal. It's not you doing it. But if you dislike money and you hate money, then you will push it away. You've got to fall in love with money. Like, I know that sounds really like unspiritual, but it's part of our society. It's part of our culture. And the more that you dislike it, the more you'll push it away. Like, it's not evil in itself. Like, if you look up the philosophy of money, like in the beginning it was a sweet gesture. It became evil by abuse from powers, from higher powers, and from people that took advantage of other people. And you just have to separate that fear of that abuse from the money itself and see that actually what we're doing is we're exchanging energy, and that when somebody gives you money, they're thanking you. They're saying thank you for your gifts, and that's really beautiful. And that I owe you. Like, thank you for your gifts, I owe you, I'm here, I owe you. I think they used to be called I owe you, I don't know, the history of money. So I can't go into that deep with you. If I worked with you one-on-one, then I would go into the chakras. So money can sometimes be solar plexus, sacral, or heart area, dependent on the way that you associate with it. But I think we're coming to the end, so I can't really go too far. But if I were to work with you one-on-one, or if we had more time, then I would encourage you to investigate your opinions about money. So I wouldn't investigate you to think about art. I would investigate what you feel about receiving money and your relationship to money and how that makes your body feel. Like if somebody gave you lots of money, or if somebody takes money away from you.
You want me to answer it now?
No, we haven't really got time now. But that's what I would encourage you to investigate. And if you come back tomorrow, I think I'm doing a talk, then we can maybe look at it then, if it still comes up and it's still there.
I'm in a much better flow now than I've been in a long time.
Oh, nice. That's great.
Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. I think it's maybe time. Like, I don't want to push it with anybody. It's a lot to take an hour and a half of talking. I love it, but I think the room's halved since I started talking. Yeah, and you're welcome to come back tomorrow. I also do online talks twice a week on YouTube. It's free, you don't have to pay, and you can interact with me and ask me questions. And I love doing that, and you can watch from anywhere. Just my name, Lisa Cairns. So you can just look it up and find it. I just really love talking, and I've done this for so many years. There's a lot on the internet, you'll be shocked. I've done it. I've done it since I was 30, I'm now nearly 40. So it's a lot of speaking twice a week. And now somebody's editing it into little clips, so there's just like infinite amounts on there. Yeah.
Did you meet Ramesh?
Yeah, I did meet, I spent time in India with Ramesh. Yeah. You met him?
I've
No.
heard about it.
Yeah.
I have some friends who met him.
Yeah. Nice, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the festival. And I like this.